You ready, man? Alright, go for it. Oh my gosh! What an artistic Olympic athlete. I always liked that Luigi was similar to Mario as a jack of all trades, but more quirky. Usually sacrificing a little bit of the balance they're going for with Mario, but going for some pretty fun stuff in general. It's definitely... Ken in Street Fighter is known to be a lot more limber than Ryu. They're both kind of known as like the balanced jack of all trades characters. Luigi's pretty similar, while Ken has more of a flair, like actual flair, rush down offensive flair, like with his Shoryuken. Luigi, who also has the super jump punch, goes for kind of just a lot more quirky stuff in general, like his green missile in Super Smash Brothers, rather than using the super cape that Mario has. For people that don't play a lot of Super Smash Brothers, Luigi has this move where he travels across the stage like a missile. You have a 1 in 8 chance to land a misfire. 1 in 10 starting in Smash 4 and Ultimate. What that does is the misfire sounds like, oh, that's a problem, right? It's often, something that the Luigi player looks for. It depends on the setup, but misfire will do a lot of knockback, and the goal of the game is to knock your opponent off the stage, get a knockout. And so with Luigi, you get a misfire, he just zooms across the stage. If you get hit by it, you can get KO'd even at mid%, definitely mid-high percent. You got to be careful. So when you're playing against Luigi, the 1 in 8 chance is always so interesting because it's something you always have to keep in mind. And I've been thinking about how, the spy in TF2 has a big strength with the element of surprise. But what I've been realizing is that could be with any class. Over the years, obviously spy is the most associated with element of surprise, but if someone doesn't know where the sniper is, that sounds like a good clean shot to me. Some pretty good sideline control. If someone doesn't know where the medic is, then that's a benefit to the medic, healing his teammates and building ubercharge. If someone doesn't know where the engineer is, you could just rock around the corner and bam, there's a level 3 sentry gun ready to kill you in no time flat. You don't know where a heavy is. Well, top level competitive actually has been pushing heavy on the flank, helping out scout and soldier. There's still a lot of heavy players that stick with their combo, which is the Pyro, Demo Man, and Medic, but the fact that they're pushing an agenda to have heavy surprise flank the opposing team and mow them down, that's pretty cool. Demo Man, if you don't know where the sticky bombs are, you run into a trap, you're probably dead, just like in Meet the Demo Man. There's obviously ways you can counter it, but I say probably in the instance of you might not have a lot of time to react, but there is a window there. On average, if you run into a sticky trap and the Demo Man is prepared, that's a pretty tough fight to get out of, and can be ending pretty quickly. Soldier, if you don't know where the soldier is, he could be dead along with you. It's like we in competitive, it's not even a competitive term, but it's definitely something to stay aware of, is a bombing soldier. You're trying to, as a pyro man, I'm trying to protect my medic in a lot of cases and the clients he heals. So a soldier just bombing in and destroying the medic, even if the soldier dies, that's a huge trade-off. So that element of surprise, the joke is look up, right? TF2 isn't just an X-axis game. You got to make sure that you're watching the skies as well. So that element of surprise is really strong there. Scout often is paired similar to the spy, where if you aren't keeping track of your surroundings, the flank, a scout coming up behind you with the scatter gun can easily two-shot most characters in the game, even with the context of like buffing health and all that. Being able to just get 2 clean scattergun shots is huge. And so Pyro, this is where it all started for me. This whole, the thought of, where can we evaluate the element of surprise? Because the element of surprise is just oftentimes a huge advantage. In nature, constantly with predators and prey, the predator is often looking for that element of surprise to not give away their location and then get their kill, their food. And so for the prey, being able to stay aware of the element of surprise is also a factor there. So the element of surprise, it's more about, you know, the evaluation of what could happen. What could something that is so potent, when could that happen? How could that happen? Where can that happen? Think about all those things I thought of about what, where, how. All these things I'm pondering for this one factor. And so in Pyro's case, I've been realizing that Pyro, you know, he was originally designed to be an ambush class. He is regarded as the overall strongest bodyguard in the game. But there's also times where I'm going to go help out the flank. And I've realized that, you know, I love Pyro's flare gun and I love Pyro's flamethrower. But they definitely can get a lot of attention. They're loud, they look cool, and that's what a flare gun is originally designed for in real life, is you shoot a flare to signal where you are. And I've been realizing that there are times where when I shoot a flare, I am giving away my location. So I've been practicing not purposefully firing a flare, giving up an opportunity to ignite someone on fire to keep my stealth up in check. If I can keep my stealth up and making sure that no one knows where I am, at least in general most opponents don't know where I am, I can press the advantage of ambushing the enemy team, potentially killing their medic and getting a lot of, you know, afterburn damage on a bunch of opposing players, potentially even more kills. The element of surprise is something that, even as far as you get into playing fighting games, first-person shooter games, card games, you realize, wow, this is a huge, potent strength. Nature, hobbies, sports, being able to be prepared is important, but being prepared for the unknown, that's its own skill. I love how Blanka in Street Fighter has once talked to Ryu about just always being ready for the opponent in front of him. I think that's the right mindset to have. I think the right mindset as a competitor is I'll play any matchup and I'll play against any opponent. Now, obviously, you get to pick your character. I'm not saying any matchup as in you have to pick everyone. It's more about, hey, this is the character I'm picking. I'm ready for whatever my opponent is and whatever character they play. And that's kind of the factor here with the element of surprise, is you are preparing for all these different possibilities. In fact, I think that strength can help you a lot because on the other end, there are players that want to have absolute control over things. The element of surprise is something they hate. Luigi's misfire has a 1 in 8 chance of happening in Melee. There are people that absolutely despise that because they're trying to erase as much random number generator factors in the game as possible. They want total control over things that can happen. But that's the fascinating part. Even if you take that away, you're not controlling your opponent. Now, there's things like conditioning, and I think that's big. Can you get your opponent to start blocking when you throw moves out? That's awesome. But I think some people, they're so, you know, caught up in X has to always equal to Y that they're scared of the element of surprise. In the Pokemon trading card game, there's often what's called rogue decks, and throughout my career, I didn't, you know, hear about rogue decks and say that's what I want to do. I just ended up always playing decks that were off the radar. That's just something I like to push different ideas. And so when I heard the term rogue deck, I was like, oh, rogue, what does that even mean? But yeah, kind of off the radar, uncharted. And it's fun. It's fun to push yourself, and also there's a lot of people that might not be prepared for it. What's even more funny is if they're not prepared for it, and then rather than having the humility to grow, that they start writing it off as cheese, gimmicks, I won't lose to this again. And it's like, well, you know, the important part about competition is doing your best, not giving up, play to win. And even though you lost here, you know, reflect upon what I did to beat you here. And, you know, when your fragile ego gets involved and you're like, I lost to cheese, and it's like cheese in a card game where random variation can happen, or Smogon Pokemon where random variation is baked into the game. You have to accept the possibilities within that game. Just like what Blanka's saying, fighting in front of being prepared against anyone. Being able to be prepared against the element of surprise is a pretty daring challenge. It's a daring challenge in life. You know, you're staring at the abyss, but you're not looking away. You're able to venture forth, knowing who you are and the foundation you bring upon yourself. You keep venturing forward, and all these elements of surprise, you can go, oh, that's pretty cool. Thankfully, I'm gonna, use what I've practiced to do the best I can and adjust accordingly to what element is presented in front of me. In competitive Pokemon, Smogon, we're currently in Gen 9, and while National Dex did ban the terrestrialization mechanic, you can play with terrestrialization in OU to Little Cup and Uber as well. For people that don't play Pokemon, it's basically those are the standard formats. OU is considered like the core standard format, and then the ones around it are based off of like statistical usage of the Pokemon, and then Uber is the ban list. And regardless, in these formats right now, you can change your type. So I can send out Venusaur and have it as a Terra type of water. And what's really cool about terrestrialization is by changing your type, it can change the whole dynamic of the game. You can only use it once per game though. And what's fascinating is, just like in the TCG where I was making rogue decks because I wanted to creatively push different things, this allows for players to creatively push a lot of different sets that a lot of people didn't even think of at first, and then once they show that dynamic, other people might catch on and say, wow, that's awesome, I really enjoy that. There's things like you can run Belly Drum Charizard with a Citrus Berry, and then Terra Ground to be immune to electric moves. You could run Terra Electric Gengar with Thunderbolt and a Choice Scarf in the current iteration of how there's a lot of Pokemon weak to electric in the metagame, and by metagame I mean most used Pokemon in OU, but Terra Electric will boost your Thunderbolt with Gengar, right? And even with all of this in mind, you can beat someone with that strategy, and I've seen people rant about it. Again, they try to call it cheese and gimmicks, but if you're losing to cheese and gimmicks, isn't that on you? That's the whole factor of this, the fragile ego talking. It doesn't want to admit it lost to a rogue strategy. And you oftentimes, when you see people behave like that, you can kind of trace behavior of the person often wanting to be nested. They often want to do X to Y. They want it to be, you have these Pokemon out, that is the X. If I do Y, then Z will happen and I'll win the game. No! Your Gengar's not supposed to be Terra Electric. My own Thunderbolt is resisted now? I lost? Cheese! But to me, it's like if I lost that, I'm like, hey, that's awesome. That can inspire me to make my own sets. That's kind of the fun part too. That Belly Drum Charizard set is something I've seen on ladder before. It's fun to watch. I really enjoy it, and I think there's a lot that you can take away from creative endeavors, pushing that element of surprise. And that's the fun part too, is if we play a game and let's say again we're running Pokemon, and currently right now for my team I have Terra Poison on Abomasnow. It lets me resist a lot of fighting moves, fairy moves. Something like Iron Valiant comes out who can use both Moonblast and close combat. I click Terra Poison, I click Aurora Veil, Abomasnow survives the fairy or fighting move. Hopefully, we'll see, If not, that's okay, but survives the fighting move, gets the defense buffs for my team, and if my opponent says nice cheese, it's like, well, to me, if you're not gonna respect that strategy, the next time we play, are you gonna be so focused on that specific thing because you don't want to lose to it that now I'm gonna mix up and not Terra my Abomasnow? I'm gonna switch up. I'm gonna switch to another Pokemon here instead of having Abomasnow out. If your expectation is that I am crutching off of this rogue mechanic, this element of surprise. I think that's the interesting factor about the element of surprise, is obviously after the surprise is done, can the opponent adapt? But that's the fun part. They might be so focused on Terra Poison Abomasnow because their own ego might say, I can't lose to this again. This is not a trend. I can't accept this. So now they're hyper-focused on not losing to that again, but I'm already focusing on something else. I want to Terra Grass my Therian Thundurus to use a boosted Grass Knot on Great Tusk. There's all these different things. I'm waiting to Shell Smash my Cloyster, Terra Ice to try to wall break these Steel types that resist Ice. And there's all these different factors about a Pokemon game. There's all these different factors in a competitive game. So if you can get your opponent to hyper-focus on one thing because they can't handle losing to it, that's its own element of surprise. It's like, oh, surprise, I also am using other tactics here. I've also practiced this game. I'm not putting all my chips in one basket off the element of surprise. That can be a tactic where you might try to bank off the element of surprise, but In this case, that's only one of 6 Pokemon. I think it is important to obviously practice the foundation of being a good player. So by being a good player, having a good foundation, again, whether it's a fighting game, a card game, or Pokemon Smogon, having that foundation to fall back on is great for consistency, all while you're looking for certain, weaknesses in the opponent, certain things they can't handle. What do they bring to the table? How do they press buttons differently? We bring who we are to how we play, and how we react to the element of surprise is, ironically, a big poker tell. I say ironically, but let's be honest, poker players often are capitalizing off of the element of surprise and how opponents handle that. There are opponents that want to be statistic-oriented in their play at the table, and they try to erase as much random factors as possible. Then there are players that are all about adjusting to what cards are dealt to them and the opponent, and how can they play the opponent? How can they play off of emotions? Or in other cases, no emotions. If my opponent is not showing any poker tell or any sign of emotion, I'm now trying to wonder, are they hyper-analyzing the statistics of risk and reward here? Are they known to be the type of player that, even though they're not showing emotion here, do they get angry when things don't go their way? What if I go all in right now and my hand is a 4 and a 5? Will a bluff like that, potential bluff, could reveal like 2 5s later on, get a 3 of a kind, but would that potential bluff rattle the opponent's foundation, that element of surprise? It makes the opponent go, who would do something like that? Maybe. That's the fun part about that. That's the fun part about seeing the reaction to element of surprise. And playing the Pyro in TF2, you are trying to stay hyper aware of all these classes trying to kill your medic and your team in general. And so that push and shove of both being aware of the element of surprise, but also maintaining your own form of element of surprise is an important edge to hone. It's important for the sword and the shield here. And just like in fighting games and card games and TF2, your bread and butter is that kind of game sense, the aim, being aware of your resources of ammo and HP. There's a lot of cool things that when you build these fundamentals and then you add on top of the element of surprise, both offensively and defensively, that's a great resource to carry around with you. That's a great utility kit to have, always and forever. I love Mondays.